There's a phrase we use this time of year. We say, well, summer was fun, but now it's back to the grind. And usually what we have in mind is this image of Sisyphus pushing that rock up the hill in this endless treadmill of effort. And in this paradigm, of course, of life, there's this sense that, well, that from time to time you get breaks. They're called vacations, and you're able to go and romp on the beach and enjoy your friends and sip uh, umbrella drinks, and your kids get to blow bubbles in their milk, and you create all these wonderful, warm memories, but you only get a couple of them a year, and then it's back to the grind, or as we often say, to the real world. The Christian life is so different from that. What made people want to become Christians in Rome wasn't watching Christians cavort on the beach or play in the sand or cheer for their favorite gladiator. It was watching how they handled the hassles of daily life Monday through Friday. I mean, think of it for a moment. Jesus was a carpenter. I was wondering the other day, did anybody ever come back with one of his chairs and in the shop and throw it on the counter and say, that's a piece of junk, I want my money back? There was something about the grace and the love with which Christians handled moments like that that made them irresistible. And now, as we're just making out our to-do list for the coming few weeks of how to get ready for all that's coming in the fall, here I now show up to you with another list. Only this is not a to-do list. The fruit of the Spirit is a to-be list. It really is, as I said a moment ago, a montage of the characteristics of Jesus that Paul gives to us, which are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. This image of fruit that Paul uses, he takes right from Jesus' own words as he is sitting with his friends around the table at the Last Supper, as Jesus speaks in John 15. So that's what I'd like for us to do, is look at John chapter 15. We're going to look at verses 5 through 8, and then I'm going to add verse 16 on to that as well. John chapter 15, verses 5 through 8, and then adding verse 16. We read, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. And then we add verse 16. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit. Fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command, love each other. Think what this is saying. It is absolutely astonishing. It's saying that if I have a vital living relationship with Jesus Christ, I am going to metamorphose day by day into a better person. I will grow more and more every day to be like the Son of God, as evidenced in the appearance of my life of greater love, greater joy, greater peace, greater kindness, and so on. And as Jesus says, whatever the Father you ask, the Father will give you of my character. I think, though, for a lot of us, we've accepted Christ. We know we're going to heaven, and pretty much our life from now, we see our life now as sort of a sin management program. The Apostle John says, little children, it does not yet appear what we shall be, but this we know, when Christ appears, we shall be like him as he is. So Jesus doesn't just come to us and say, you're forgiven, and leave it at that. He says, my life, I want to grow inside you. And this matters to God more than anything else. In verse 16, we just read that Jesus says, I chose you and appointed you. Why? That you might go and bear fruit. One of the things we need to get straight in the church is that the fruit of the Spirit matter more to God than the gifts of the Spirit. And that's something that the church has not gotten straight, because the fruit of the Spirit have to do with character, and the gifts of the Spirit have to do with performance. And one of the ways that the church has fallen on its face over recent decades has been we have so overvalued the gifts of the Spirit at the expense of valuing the fruit of the Spirit. We have been so mesmerized by the dazzling gifts of Christian celebrities. You ever notice it's almost like as soon as some rock star or some star athlete becomes a Christian, we stick a Bible in their hand and we shove them out before the adoring millions. And then how many of them have just done the spectacular nosedive in some moral area of their life right before the spotlight of the whole world? Why? Because they're all gift and they're no fruit. The fruit takes time to grow. And then the other way the gifts of the Spirit and the fruit of the Spirit are different is you and I have a gift, but we don't have all the gifts. 1 Corinthians 12 says, each has been given a gift. You have a gift, I have a gift. None of us have all the gifts. No, obviously, all Christians are to exhibit all of the fruit of the Spirit at all times in our lives. So much so that you almost get the impression, if we first read the Galatians, it almost sounds like Paul has this grammatical error. If you and I were writing what Paul wrote, we would have probably said the fruit of the Spirit are joy, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, and all the rest. What Paul says is the fruit of the Spirit is singular. It's a single package. It's all or nothing. It's all in one. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. And Jesus is brutally honest here. He says, if you're not bearing fruit, he says you might as well get chainsawed off the tree and chopped up into kindling and used as firewood, thrown in the fire. There's a simple assessment you can do right now to kind of get a sense of whether your fruit is growing or whether it's dying on the vine. It's kind of simplistic, but it gives an idea of how we can take metrics of fruit of the Spirit in our life. Let me just ask you this question. And that is this: are you more or less irritable than you were a year ago? Think about you last August. Think of you this August. This August, are you less likely to be flying off the handle and skewering people with wounding words? Are you having to apologize less often this August than you were last August? Well, that would be a sign that the fruit of the Spirit is growing in your life. Some of us are living with things in our lives that we shouldn't be because we've just given up trying to change. Think of your life right now. Are there things in your life that are bothering you? Things that are constant irritations that create tension in your relationships? Are there things that disturb your speech, your sleep, and maybe even are sabotaging some of your dreams? Are you an anxious person who wants at last to find peace? Are you an angry person and a sarcastic person who wants to become the kind of person that other people finally can feel safe around and draw close to and want to be close to? It's far too soon for you to give up hope that you can change. This text is saying that you can. There's even hope for your marriage. I remember seeing a cartoon in the New Yorker magazine. It showed this old, jowly-faced, stern-faced looking man who was sitting on a park bench staring straight ahead, and next to him was sitting his wife, and the wife was speaking to a squirrel. She said wistfully, "I was just 18 when dashing Jerome Butler looked at me with bold admiration. There was a tight feeling about my heart, and for a moment I thought I would swoon. Over the years that followed, I was courted with wine and roses and Shakespeare. My soul awoke with a gasp at the very moment of awakening, and it went out to him forever. Today, however, I feel privileged to get so much as a grunt out of the old coot." Well, there's even hope for those kinds of marriages. I love the words of Gail Goodwin in her book, The Finishing School. She writes, there are two kinds of people. One kind you can tell just by looking at them at what point they congealed into their final selves. It might be a very nice self, but you could expect no more surprises from it. Whereas the other kind of person keeps moving and changing and growing. Complacency is the first sign of congealment. You don't have to be a congealed old coot. Our connection with God that comes through Jesus can, over time, turn us into the very people we've always dreamed of becoming. And so, two questions. Why is this possible? And then how is this possible? First of all, why it is possible for us to become new people in Christ is because it does not depend on us. It's a power that comes from elsewhere. We Christians do things in the power of someone else. It is Him working through us. In marriage, it's only by holding on to God that we find the strength to hold on to one another for a lifetime. And so there's hope even for broken people, shallow, immature people, people like us. And I'll tell you why. And this is astonishing. Think about this. What are the fruit of the Spirit? The fruit of the Spirit are the communicable attributes of God. There are communicable attributes of God. Theologians, what they used to do is they would draw a line down the center of a paper and they would say, okay, over here are the incommunicable attributes of God. You know what they are? They're the ones we don't have. Omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence. Even in heaven, you're not going to be everywhere all at once. There are always going to be mysteries, even in heaven, that are only known to the infinite mind of God. And so they're the incommunicable attributes of God. We're never going to have those. But think about it. There are waiting for us to take on ourselves, even today and this week, the communicable attributes of our God, which are love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and gentleness and goodness and self-control. If you live in the same house with somebody, you're going to get their communicable diseases. And so it is as we draw close to God, we become like Him. Did you ever notice that here in John 15, we find listed, a little Bible study here, the first three fruit of the Spirit in Galatians appear here in John 15. And what are the first three fruit of the Spirit? Love, joy, and peace. And listen to what Jesus says here in John 15. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. Whose love are we supposed to remain in? Jesus' love. And then 2 verses later, Jesus says, He says this, I have told you these things that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. So whose joy are we to live in? Jesus' joy. And then prior to John 15 in chapter 14, verse 27, in the same talk He's having with His disciples, Jesus says, peace I leave you, my peace I give you. Not do I give as the world gives. Whose peace are we supposed to live in? It's His joy, His love, His peace that flows into us like the chemicals and the sap and all of the juices that flow from a branch down into the fruit. And it's important for us to remember that if you have accepted Christ, even if there's no visible evidence of that fruit, and even if there's countervailing evidence against there being that fruit, those little seeds of love and joy and peace, they're still in your life. I love what 1 Peter 2:2 says, grow up into your salvation. This is an organic process. You should feel good about it. This is organic. Good example of this is you ever see a boy who's 5'6", he's maybe 13 years old, looks like a normal boy's 13, 5'6". Then you look down and you see his feet are like size 13s, right? And you go, oh my goodness. And the kid, I mean, you look at him, he looks, he's still got peach fuzz and his voice hasn't changed. He's got a high-pitched voice. But then you look at those feet and you go, oh my goodness. And what do you people say? They say, well, he'll grow into them. We grow up into the fullness of our salvation in Jesus, of His love, His joy, His patience, His kindness. So I'll tell you what we're not going to do over these next coming weeks. We're not going to really work hard to be loving. We are not going to knock ourselves out with a 5-point strategy for being joyful. We're not going to go through some elaborate makeover of our personalities. We're not going to do any of those things. And you say, well, then how are we going to change? I've just described why we can change because it doesn't begin with us. But the question of how do we change is what Jesus addresses here. And it's just one word. And Jesus is so blunt and so repetitive. Let me just say again what Jesus says to us about how do we grow? How do we change? He says, remain in me and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. Get the word yet? Remain. I'm the vine, you're the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you will, The word is remain. I love the King James word. What's the King James word? The word is abide. If you abide in me. Abide with somebody over a long period of time, and you're going to become a lot like that person. On the other hand, if you do not abide with anybody, a certain person, if you don't abide with that person, you are never going to become like that person. And of course, we have this thing that we say many, many times. It's kind of this conventional wisdom that is older couples have been together for decades and decades. They say even couples even start looking a lot like each other. I love the cartoon of an old couple in which one says to the other, "Which one of us doesn't like broccoli?" Our intimacy with Jesus over time shapes us more and more into his likeness. Now, let me show you one more picture. Notice that? That's the famous picture by Michelangelo, his painting on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And what I want you to see there is the body language of God. God is looking at Adam. He is straining toward Adam. And everything in this painting screams God's desire to reach out, to touch, and to connect with the human he has created. That is how God desires to abide with you and me. God is with us. He's invisible. But think of that God that you see there as the living presence of our God who is with us right now, moment by moment. And he is a lot closer than we think. How do we abide in him? Well, you abide in him through prayer. You're doing it right now through worship. This is abiding in him. Through obedience. It's not by filling your calendar with religious activities. It's not beating yourself up for not having done enough. In fact, mostly it's doing the stuff that you normally do in the course of your everyday, only doing them now with Jesus. Think for a moment, you wake up in the morning. You can wake up with Jesus. One of the things that I practiced over the years is years ago I heard my hero John Stott, a great British preacher, say that when he wakes up in the morning, he wakes up and he says, "Good morning, Father. Good morning, Son. Good morning, Spirit." Or later in the day, you can say, "Jesus, let's do carpool together." Or Jesus, let's solve this problem I've got together. Or Jesus, let's drive together. Or at night you can say, "Lord, let's watch CNN together." And then you watch CNN, you see all the stuff going on in Washington, and if you're watching with Jesus, you might even find yourself saying, "God bless those Democrats," or "God bless those Republicans," instead of what you might be saying in the normal course of what you say. If you abide, moment by moment, you will bear much fruit. The closer we come to him, the longer we gaze at him, the more time we spend with him, the more we become like him, and the more his love flows through us to others. Let me give you one final example and story. I used to be the pastor of a church in the famed apple country of Washington State, in Yakima, Washington, where so many of the marvelous red delicious apples are grown. And I remember one time I was sitting in my office on a late afternoon in the late summer when there was a storm that wafted over the building, and I saw the storm outside the window, and I didn't think much about it. An hour later, a young apple grower came to the outside office and said that he wanted to see me. His name was Larry. His wife was Martha, and they had two small children. Big, burly guy, drove a pickup truck, and just from Central Casting, a burly young farmer. And he came in, and he sat down, and he said, that storm that just went over just destroyed my crop. And he went on to describe how he and his wife, Martha, had over the 20 minutes of that storm stood on their porch and held each other as they watched everything they'd ever dreamed of and everything that they'd ever worked for just be destroyed, because that storm had been a hailstorm, and the hail had fallen out of the sky and nicked each of the apples on all of the trees in his orchard. And having nicked those apples now were no longer, they would never be accepted by supermarkets to be put in the produce section. As a matter of fact, it was a total loss. It was not even worth it for him to pay the money to get those apples picked off the tree. And the way that the finances work is that these farmers would borrow all of their money for all of their expenses for the coming year. And then when they sell their harvest, then they pay off their debts. And then whatever's left is their profit. He didn't have a harvest even to sell. And so he was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And he sat there in front of me, and I saw this big man take his head and bury it in his hands and weep. And I thought, as I sat there, all this is about a bunch of fruit. Well, later Larry got his feet on the ground, and he ended up getting back, and he and Martha spent a lot of years being very successful in apple farming. But let me tell you what this reminded me of. I began to think about Jesus, who wept in the Garden of Gethsemane, who went to the cross, he bled and he died, and he paid the debt for our sin on the cross. And all that he went through was over a bunch of fruit. The fruit that he wants to see grow in us, that we might be like him. Augustine once said, he became as we are so that we might become as he is. And that's the whole purpose of Christianity. I love the words of our dear friend C.S. Lewis. He said this. He said, the church exists for no other purpose but to make little Christs. If they're not doing that, all the cathedrals, clergy, missions, sermons, and even the Bible itself are simply a waste of time. God became man for no other purpose. Fulfill your purpose. It's simple. Simply abide, 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 abide in him.